The people in the darkness have seen a holy light. The gloom has turned to brightness, and the blind receive their sight. He's multiplied the nation and added to our joy,
and we're rejoicing like men dividing spoil. He's the light of the world. He's the light of the world. We've stumbled in the darkness, now we're walking in the light. He's the light of the world. He's the light. He's the light of the world. He's the light.
Welcome to Messianic Moments, the newest production brought to you by Worldwin Media. I'm your host, Lee Paris, and we thank you for joining us today for our premiere installment of Messianic Moments. We are going to explore the multitude of facets of Messianic Judaism, that is, Jewish people who believe in Yeshua or Jesus, the Messiah of Israel. We hope to share with you the culture, music, and lifestyles of Messianic Jews who have come to faith in Yeshua and explore what we believe is the root of modern Christianity. Messianic Moments will be bringing you interviews with many different people in the Messianic community, from leaders of ministries dedicated to bringing the truth of the Word to Jewish people, to various pastors and Messianic rabbis who lead the congregations in the Chicagoland area, and worship teams and Messianic bands that lead us in worship and praise. We're glad you joined us today. Please stay with us as we share some great fellowship with today's special guest and a very good friend of mine, Jan Moskowitz, the Midwest Director of Jews for Jesus. We'll be right back. It's with great pleasure that we welcome Jan Moskowitz to our show.
Hi, Lee. It's good to be with you.
Jan, what's a nice Jewish boy like you doing believing in Jesus?
It's a great question. The better question is, why aren't all nice Jewish boys believing in Jesus? I was raised as a nice Jewish boy in New York City, you know, the homeland, and
Yes.
the other homeland. Conservadox Jewish home, you know, Orthodox moving toward conservative, nice bar mitzvah. Always raised believing that there was a God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I guess it was after my bar mitzvah that I started getting involved in Zionism, you know, and kind of moved away from religious identity as a Jew and more into a cultural identity as a Jew. And in 1967, I was about 18 or 19 at the time, the Six-Day War broke out in Israel, and I mixed my sense of adventure and my sense of Zionism, and I ran off to join the Israeli army. Don't get excited. By the time I got there, the war was over. You know, our people have this thing about 6 days, the seventh day they rest. So I wound up picking peaches on a kibbutz as a volunteer until they threw me off the kibbutz. I remember it was the 60s, and I was probably more of a hippie than a Zionist at the time. But interesting thing happened. I had gone to Israel pretty much an atheist. When I got to Israel, I got to Jerusalem right after they liberated the city, and I was one of the, I guess within a week, one of the first people to get to the wall. It had just been liberated, and I was at the Western Wall. I was overwhelmed by the emotions of being there, and I came to the conclusion that this could not be a coincidence. That the Jewish people, the preservation of the Jewish people, and my being there, children of survivors, and my father and mother were both survivors of the Holocaust. Now, I won't say it was a spiritual moment, but it was an emotional moment that really made me think, you know, maybe this isn't an accident of history. Maybe there really is a God. Maybe there really is a destiny for our people. And that started me thinking and started me on my search. I got involved in Jewish mysticism, Eastern mysticism, the hippie culture, and eventually brought me to San Francisco. And I and a number of Jewish friends were out in Sausalito, California. And over a period of about 6 months or so, these Jewish guys that I were with all came to believe that Jesus was the Messiah of Israel. And they started telling me about it, you know. Now, by this time, I thought Jesus was an avatar like everybody else, but I never really, you know, put it together that he was like the Messiah of Israel. But their lives had changed, and I could see that their lives were changed, and I was challenged. So I started reading the Bible, both the Old and New Testaments. What I read, I believed. But more importantly, as I was reading it, certain things were happening in my life, certain coincidences that weren't coincidences. And over about 6 months of reading the Bible and these coincidences coming together, I realized one night the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is God, and that Jesus was his Messiah. And I prayed and made him the Lord of my life. And those nice Jewish boys and myself met a man named Moishe Rosen, and we kind of came together and started the organization called Jews for Jesus. Back then it wasn't an organization, it was more like just a group of Jewish people who wanted to tell other Jewish people that Jesus is the Messiah. And that's how a nice Jewish boy came to believe in Jesus.
It all seems to start out of New York. I don't know. Must be the food. How would you define Messianic Judaism? If we were to put a label on it or a description, what would your description be?
Let me back up, okay? May I not use the term Messianic Judaism? It's really, it kind of rings a lot of bells. We can go to that term in a moment. Let's just say, what are Messianic Jews, okay? Messianic Jews are Jews, born Jewish, raised Jewish, enculturated as Jews, who see themselves as Jews, who think like Jews, who've come to the conclusion that Jesus is the Messiah of Israel, and have determined to flesh out what that faith looks like in Jewish forms and culture. Okay? So that's what a Messianic Jew is. A Messianic Jew is somebody who recognizes that believing in Jesus is the most Jewish thing you can do. I mean, if he is the Messiah, then what better thing to do, you know? I think a lot of people wrestle with, you know, I saw this picture once in a church of Jesus praying, and it said, King of the Jews. And I looked at the picture, it was blonde hair, blue-eyed, and I thought, King of Norway maybe, but I'm not sure about the Jews. And so Messianic Jews are the ones who say, you know what, he probably looks, you know, a little less Nordic.
A little ruddier.
A little ruddier, as the Bible says. I think, and not that we're knocking, and by the way, if there are any Vikings out there, please forgive me, I'm not knocking you guys, but what I am saying is that I think Messianic Jews are the kind of people who recognize that Jesus was Jewish, the context is Jewish, and that we don't need to become Gentiles in order to worship him.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Now, some people in the Jewish community say that you cannot be Jewish and believe in Jesus. What would you say to them?
I would say they're making a mistake. You can't practice their kind of Judaism and believe in Jesus. And that's why I didn't want to use the word Messianic Judaism. Because if you're talking about Judaism, the Judaism of the last 2,000 years is predicated on the denial that Jesus is the Messiah. At least that's one of the things it's predicated on. So they're right. You can't practice their kind of Judaism and call yourself a believer in Jesus. But I don't think you want to define being a Jew in terms of just what you believe or not believe. In other words, I think the religious structure called Judaism, which is the religion of the Jewish people, is one definer of what being a Jew is. But boy, there's a whole lot more. In fact, most of the Jewish people in the world today do not use, you know, rabbinic Judaism as a way to define themselves. Most Jewish people, most of the people watching this program who know Jewish people know that they're secular, that they're not orthodox or even conservative in their attitude. They probably don't attend synagogue. So that can't be the defining thing about what a Jew is. So when they say, well, you can't believe in Jesus and be Jewish, I say, stop. When I became a believer in Jesus, did I stop caring about things that happened to Jewish people? When I became a believer in Jesus, did all of a sudden I stop lighting Hanukkah candles? When I started believing in Jesus, does that mean I no longer relate to my mother, who's a survivor of the Holocaust, and bring my kids into her house and teach her about my people and my history? Do I not transmit to my children the fact that they are part of a 4,000-year line in heritage and that they shouldn't be proud of it? All because I believe in the Jewish Messiah? You know, we have an expression in French, Narishkeit. It's Yiddish. It means foolishness. You know, the idea is that when you're Jewish, you're socialized into being part of a group. It's the way you think. It's your culture. It's your heritage. It's your history. It's your worldview. that doesn't change when you become a believer in Jesus. If anything, it becomes amplified.
Yeah, I always found that myself, that when I came to faith, I felt more Jewish than I ever did before.
Yeah, that's because you realized your being a Jew was not an accident of birth, but a sovereign act of God. And once you know that God, and you realize that God exists, and you realize that being Jewish is what He determined for you to be. Now let me quickly say that I'm jazzed to be Jewish, but the rainbow would be very boring if it were just one or two colors. But God in His graciousness makes many colors, many cultures, and He redeems all of them. We need to celebrate all of them.
Indeed. Tell us about Jews for Jesus. How did it really get started, and what's its mission?
Well, as I said earlier, it was a bunch of Jewish kids that met Moishe Rosen. Moishe Rosen at that time was working for a different mission society. He was a little older than us, and he had a mimeograph machine, so we let him be in charge. And it was Jewish kids who banded together to tell other Jews that we found the Messiah. It started out basically more like a tribe than a mission, but we came together, and over the years, it's the largest Jewish mission society in the world, and our mission statement pretty much articulates what we are. We exist to make the Messiahship of Jesus an unavoidable issue to our Jewish people worldwide. I mean, we're an organization made up of Jews and Gentiles with the clear declaration that Jesus is the Messiah for Jews and Gentiles. That's what we do. And that's all we do. I'd like to liken it unto something like a Zionist organization, or, B'nai B'rith or something like that. Organizations that agitate among a certain constituency for a particular position. Or maybe a political party like the Democrats or Republicans, except we agitate for the King of Israel. That's what we do.
Well, I remember when I used to take the train downtown, your guys would always be out on the street handing out those tracts, and I'd always take one and grumble at them, but I always managed to take it and read it on the train.
I appreciate that.
Well, it was a really interesting experience, because it was something I remembered as I really, came into faith on my own, and I always remembered. And if it wasn't for your kids being out there and you guys being out there, I wonder how many people would have never heard this or even thought that it was possible.
It's interesting, Jews for Jesus is probably best known for its forthright, direct testimony on the streets. However, perhaps the deeper ministry that we have is really in people's homes. I mean, we're out there on the streets. We raise the image of Jews can believe in Jesus. I mean, that's the nice thing. When you see somebody on the street and it says Jews for Jesus, you walk by and go, he's Meshuggah, he's crazy. Then you see another one across the street, you go, and he's Meshuggah because he convinced them. Then you see three more, you go, maybe they're not so crazy. All these Jews that really do believe in Jesus. All my life I've been told Jews don't believe in Jesus, and now I just met 5 of them on the street. Now 30 years ago there were 5. Now there's 5,000. A funny story, because it's really worth telling. 30 years ago, a Jew who believed in Jesus was rare as unicorns. But today, you can get on a subway or you can ride on an airplane, and somebody says, so what do you do? And you say, well, I'm a Jew, I believe in Jesus. And the Jewish person will respond and say, every family has one. Because it seems like, there's always I have a cousin, So by the grace of God, it's becoming understood that Jews can believe in Jesus and still be Jewish, And that's what our ministry is about.
Now, what are the various ministries in Jews for Jesus? Do you have them broken down by various ministries? I know you have a musical team.
Yeah, Jews for Jesus is primarily proclamation-oriented. However, we do have a music team called the Liberated Wailing Wall, which does Jewish gospel music. And their primary ministry, they're a mobile evangelistic team. They travel. And they'll go from city to city, ministering in churches and helping the church see its Jewish roots and turning them on to a Jewish way to worship. And then they'll go to local college campuses or city streets and present the gospel to Jews and Gentiles on the streets. And and then work with local groups to follow up on it. Then we have our branches, and we have 11 branches around the world. And they are stations, missionary stations, where there are Jews and Gentiles who work with us in visiting and encountering Jewish people and presenting the gospel, and then discipling them, getting them grounded in the Word, and then referring them to local Bible-believing congregations, be they Messianic or otherwise. That's the primary ministry. We have a publications ministry. We have a youth program that we take children of Jewish believers to camp. And my wife just came back from Israel. She had 19 college students and took them through Israel for 2 weeks, giving them a sense of their own identity as Jews in Israel and as believers. Now, there's a lot of different ministries involved.
Now, you have a lot of students working with Jews for Jesus, I understand. Where do these students come from?
Well, we mentor young Jewish believers, okay? Many of the students come to faith through our ministry. Others who are already believers will come to our ministry to gain a time of learning. Some will go to Moody Bible Institute or Trinity or Wheaton. And when they come into the area, we'll mentor them and kind of work with them. We also have a summer program where we take students from around the world and bring them to Chicago for a 2-week training period, and then send them back to some major city in the United States or around the world where there's a large Jewish population. New York City Summer Witnessing Campaign, or our Behold Your God campaigns, where we'll send people to cities of populations of 25,000 Jews or more, and we'll give them a real hands-on experience on sharing their faith with Jews and Gentiles.
Let's go back and talk about the Messianic movement itself. When did it start? Was it an outshoot of the 60s and the Jesus movement, or
no? Actually, I think you can date Jews for Jesus and the Messianic movement at about the same time, around 33 A.D., give or take a few years. I think we need to recognize that this is a resurgence of what was started back in the first century. People need to remember that the first believers were Jews for Jesus, and that Christianity was a Jewish movement within the context of the Jewish world. We sent the Gentiles one of our best, Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, and he did a great job, and the Holy Spirit insisted that Gentiles be allowed in, Acts 15, and it kind of grew from there. There were always Jews who believed in Jesus well into the 7th century, but the church kind of dominated and kind of took it in a different direction. So the Jewish identity of the believers was kind of lost. And then by the 7th century, Islam had just kind of wiped out all of the remnants of any kind of Jewish congregations that existed in the Middle East. And it really wasn't until after the Reformation and a restoration of biblical authority and coming back to the Bible and going back to the original text that people started appreciating Hebrew and the Jewish context. And then the modern mission movement in the 17 and 1800s, again, people started saying, well, we need to reach peoples. Jewish peoples are one of those peoples. And then I say in the mid-1800s, there started to emerge Jewish believers, some who were assimilated into large churches and others who wanted to retain their Jewish identity. I would say by World War II, there were a number of large Jewish populations in Europe where there were Jewish believers, but they perished in the Holocaust along with their other Jewish brethren. But it wasn't until the late 60s when there was this reemergence, where the Holy Spirit obviously was doing something remarkable among the young people in America. Large segments of Jewish kids, hippies, who had set out looking for the truth, found him. And it was in the late 60s and early 70s. Some like to say, the Six-Day War, the recapturing of Jerusalem is one of the starting points of it, and may very well be. And it was then that this large increase of Jewish kids came to faith in Jesus, large enough to retain their Jewish identity, not be assimilated into a larger culture, and started making pockets of Jewish believers who started finding forms that were distinctly Jewish to express their new faith. And that's how it really got started.
What are some of the common reasons that Jewish people would come to faith in Jesus?
because it's true. That's the only reason anybody should come to faith in Jesus. I think perhaps the biggest obstacle for Jews coming to faith in Jesus is loyalty to group. Right? We like to think that Jewish people have this deep theological sophistication in why they construct arguments why Jesus isn't the Messiah, and know the Jewish community and the Orthodox community have got these reasons. The main reason that Jews don't believe in Jesus is because believing in Jesus makes you them. When we were growing up, there's us and them, us being the Jews and them being everybody else. And if you like being an us, you don't become a them. And if you believe in Jesus, you ain't an us anymore, you're a them. And so there's this loyalty issue that when a Jewish person hears the gospel, they don't really hear the gospel. They don't hear the love of God. They don't see the Jewishness of it. They hear, would you like to become a them? And they go, no, I like being an us. So perhaps the thing that helps a Jewish person come to faith in Jesus more than anything else is recognizing that it's true and that the truth is worth purchasing no matter what the cost. See, loyalty is a virtue, but it ceases to be a virtue when it is employed in the service of a lie. Jesus is the Messiah. It's the most Jewish thing to believe in him. And though I'm loyal and I want to be loyal to the Jewish people, and I don't want Jewish people to be disloyal to the Jewish people, I want them to know the truth. And the truth is, he is the Messiah.
And it's said the truth will set you free.
Exactly.
Indeed. Now, it's been said that the Chicago Messianic community is unique. There's how many congregations are there in Chicago?
Well, I'm afraid to say. I know of 6, but I'm sure there's probably more. and so I'm not going to label them because I'll forget somebody. But I know there's at least 6. And perhaps the uniqueness is that we all love each other. We all appreciate each other. We all encourage one another. There's a great relationship among the leadership. And historically, we've been meeting together now for 20 years as a community. So all of the congregations will get together at least twice a year and celebrate a Hanukkah party and a summer barbecue of sorts, you know what I mean? And it's great to see the whole community come together. And the Messianic community in Chicago runs the gambit from congregations which are very orthopractic in the way they worship with the Torah scroll and pretty much a standard Orthodox synagogue service with Jesus in the center, and everything kind of in between to where you've got congregations which would be really B'nai First Baptist, just basically a Jewish church, and everything in between. It's really fun to see the love and the relationship they have.
Now, how do we bring our message to the churches in our communities so that they can help us with their Jewish friends and getting them to understand the gospel?
Well, I think Jews for Jesus itself has its own program about reaching the churches. I mean, our missionaries probably preach at least 3 to 4 times a month in local churches, presenting the ministry of Jews for Jesus and presenting the Jewish roots of Christianity. Demonstrations like Christ in the Passover during the Lenten season, where we will set up a table with all of the accoutrements of the Passover and how each of them points to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Or coming and teaching on the gospel and the feasts, or teaching on how to be effective in witnessing to Jewish people. Remember, most Jewish people come to faith not as a result of the witness of a Jewish mission like Jews for Jesus, or the result of a witness from the Messianic congregational movement. They come to faith because a faithful Gentile was willing to risk rejection to tell them about the Lord. So the most effective tool in witnessing to Jewish people might be the Gentile churches and helping them know how to best, share the message of Christ. And so, at least within the Jews for Jesus ministry, our main thrust in that area is to help the church be effective in witnessing to Jewish people and following up any context they may have. Now, as far as the Messianic congregational movement is concerned, I would hope that building bridges of understanding with local pastors, attending ministerial conferences, swapping pulpits, inviting communities to share worship services, and being part of the larger body of Christ in the Chicagoland area as a witness. You know, there are many within the larger Chicagoland area in the Christian community that look upon the Messianic movement with some suspicion. What is this? Is this the middle wall of partition being built up? Is this Jewish legalism? Are they under the law? Do they, you know, what happened to the sufficiency of Christ's sacrifice? And so we need to do a better job of communicating to them, hey, no. This is the Christianity that was birthed in the New Testament. This is kosher.
We always talk about tearing down that wall of separation. I suppose that's really what it's about, and getting people to realize that we share the same Messiah, and that's really what the unifying theme is.
Not only that, but I think we also recognize that if we can help them, the rest of the body, I don't like calling them, I think we can help our brothers understand the rich culture that's theirs. I mean, remember, you know, Paul says, you were strangers and afar off, are now part of the commonwealth of Israel. You know, you share the same king we do. So the privileges we had, now you have. The rich heritage that's ours, we're willing to share with you. You know, look, let me be very frank. I have nothing against Easter bunnies. I mean, you're into Easter bunnies, fine. If you want to have the Easter egg, I'm not going to knock it. I mean, I'm not going to say it's pagan or anything like that. That's not fair. You know, that's part of your cultural way of expressing the resurrection. But guess what? Resurrection Sunday fell out on a Jewish holiday called First Fruits. And if you knew that, if you understood that it wasn't a coincidence that the resurrection of Jesus happened on First Fruits, and that the Apostle Paul uses that metaphor of first fruits to talk about what the resurrection is about, your life and your walk is richer. Now, you can still have the Easter eggs, you know, but you can also now see that there's a continuity to your faith, that it didn't just come out of nowhere, you know. And that's what we want to share with our brothers and sisters. We want to help them say, no, we're not resurrecting the middle wall. We're not, you know, separating ourselves. We're saying, come, learn about your own heritage and celebrate it.
Now, you teach a Bible study downtown,
Yeah.
I believe, on Fridays.
Uh-huh.
That's still going strong?
It's been going for 20 years. It's kind of interesting, you know, Lee. It started in a friend's law office with 3 or 4 people, and then it kind of moved to a deposition room, and now it's like a conference room. It's about 40 or 50 people on Fridays at 12 o'clock. You know, if anybody's interested in coming to the Bible study or getting to know more about the Jews for Jesus or having us come to the church, let me just invite them to get a hold of us. You know, we're local Jews for Jesus, and you can reach us at 847-679-2680, or if you like to go on the web, jewsforjesus.org. You can come to our website and explore it. If you've got any Jewish friends that you'd like us to send a letter of witness to or meet with, we'd be glad to do that. If you need materials of any kind, just call. That's what we're here for.
Now, if somebody in our audience wants to find a Messianic congregation, how do they do that?
Well, if they call my office manager, Melanie, has a list right by the phone. And, you know, we are an equal opportunity encourager. So if you give us a geographic area, we'll tell you what's there, or we'll give you the whole list. There is a local Messianic site in Chicago, and I believe it's called, ChicagoMJ.org. ChicagoMJ.org, and it has all the list of all of the sites of all of the Messianic congregations. But again, if you can't remember that, just call the Jews for Jesus office. We'll be glad to help you out.
Great. Jan, thank you so much
Oh, Lee,
for
it's my
spending
pleasure.
some time with us.
Yeah.
It's always good to see you, and we'll continue to do our work together and make a difference.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Jan.
And we're rejoicing like men dividing spoil.